There was once a dying emperor whose rule over the largest empire the Americas had ever seen was falling from his dying grasp and into the unknown fate of two unfathomable disputes. The chaos that awaited Huayna Capac's death was formed on one hand by the ambitions of an alien empire from across the world, led by Francisco Pizarro, and on the other hand, way more close to home, inside of it in fact, what would be the bloody dispute between two of the emperor's sons, both of whom thought themselves the rightful heirs to the Inca fringe. This is The Last Emperor, The Rise and Fall of the Incas. Before Francisco Pizarro left the coast of Tumbes, amazed by what he discovered there, to return to Panama and then Spain to secure the rights to conquer what he discovered, he sailed first to the island of La Gorgona. 2 of the 13 men that were with him would be left behind in the mainland. They were to be sent to meet directly with the Inca Huayna Capac, for word had arrived that he, the Inca, wished to meet with 2 of the white-bearded strangers he'd heard so much about. Having no reason to distrust the people of this otherworldly empire who had received them so graciously, Pizarro agreed to send 2 of his men. But they would never be seen again, nor would they ever arrive to meet with the Inca. Somewhere in their journey they were killed. Accounts vary. Some Indians say that after the others had gone, they killed the 2 that were left behind, at which Huayna Capac was much displeased. Others relate that they were sent to the Inca, but that they were put to death on the road when the news came that the Inca was no more. Others again declare that the 2 men died. What we believe to be most probable is that the Indians killed them shortly after they had been left behind. At this point, Lord Inca Huayna Capac had been at his highest glory, but in the midst of this glory came the plague. In the midst of his power, they say that a great pestilence broke out, which was so contagious that over 200,000 souls died throughout the province, for it prevailed in all parts. The Inca caught the disease. When he felt that the pestilence had touched him, he ordered great sacrifice to be offered up for his health throughout the land. And as he became worse, he called the captains and relations and addressed them on several subjects. Among those things, they relate that he foretold that the people who had been seen on the ship would return with great power and would conquer the country. As soon as Huayna Capac was dead, the lamentations were so great that the shouting rose up to the clouds, and the noise so stupefied the birds that many fell from the great height to the ground. The news was carried to all parts, and everywhere the sorrow was deep. In Quito, as they relate, the people mourned for 10 days. Many of the principal lords accompanied the body to Cusco, all the men and women along the road coming out to weep and groan. In Cusco there was more lamentation. Sacrifices were offered up in the temple, and preparations were made for the interment in accordance with custom. They killed to be buried in the tomb more than 4,000 souls, women, pages, and other servants, as well as treasure, precious stones, and fine cloth. As was customary for chiefs, his wives would be buried with him alive. But it wasn't just the Inca who had been ill. His death sickened his very empire. Some said that as he died, he had divided the realm in 2, giving northern lands from Quito to the Andes of Quillacingas to his son Atahualpa, who had been at his side in war. The rest, Cusco and the southern heart of the empire, was to go to Huáscar, the legitimate half-born of the sacred union between brother and sister, a son of Cusco blood, from the womb of Chimpu Oclo. But others claim that he had never intended division, that his will was clear. Huáscar and Huáscar alone would inherit the whole empire, as he had inherited all from his father. The problem was not merely one of blood, it was one of perception of power, of proximity, what it meant to be Inca. Huáscar, the younger of the 2, was Inca by blood, for he was the firstborn of the Colla. Atahualpa, meanwhile, on account of having accompanied his father in many military expeditions, had the support of the army generals and the frontier. So the death of Huayna Capac did not merely leave a throne vacant, it left a question hanging over the Andes like a storm cloud. Who now was the true son of the sun? To Huáscar there was no question. Once the great mourning of his father had ended, the feast of Huáscar's coronation began, following the same customs of every Inca: fasting, retreats, hunts, and feast. At the age of 29, Huáscar assumed the fringe, and the people of Cusco, including his other siblings and the Orejones, all supported him. But Huáscar had barely placed the royal fringe upon his forehead when the winds of dissent began to stir in the north. Atahualpa received the news that Huáscar had assumed the fringe, and that he desired that all should yield him obedience. And in those halls and gardens of Quito, where the scent of his father still lingered, where Huayna Capac had been victorious and governed, the air thickened with whispers. The captains of the late emperor had not yet returned to Cusco. Some hesitated, others began to scheme. They looked around and found in Quito a second Cusco. The soil was rich, the palaces stood proud. The memory of Huayna Capac weighed heavier here than in the highlands of the capital. And among the captains left behind, one voice began to rise. Ilia Tupac. Once loyal, now serpentine, Ilia Tupac turned his gaze towards the quiet prince Atahualpa, the one who had followed Huayna Capac into battle. He spoke to the generals Calcuchima, Quisquis, Aclahualpa, Rumiñahui, names that would soon echo across battlefields soaked in blood. Ilia Tupac said that among the sons of Huayna Capac, this one showed the most spirit and valor, and that his father ordered that he should govern Quito and its territory. One by one, they agreed. They gave him his father's women, they handed him the keys to the palace, and they called him Lord. The women of his father were delivered to him, and his father's household and house services were handed over to him, to do with them according to his will. It was not a coronation, it was a declaration, the first flicker of war. In Cusco, the news arrived with outrage. Some of Huayna Capac's other sons, princes without provinces, had fled the north and returned to the capital to report what they had seen. Atahualpa, they said, was parading himself as king. He had taken the concubines of the dead emperor, he had stolen the rights of succession, he had allowed his name to be spoken with the title of Inca without ever entering Cusco. They said that they would not consent or endure that the bastard should take the name of Inca, and that he must be punished. Huáscar summoned the Orejones. He invoked the gods. He swore that the laws of the ancestors would not be broken by a son born of a lesser womb and crowned by a soldier's hand. And then Huáscar named one of the principal lords of Cusco, named Atoc or Atoco, as his captain general. The hour of words was ending. The hour of war had begun. Atahualpa, denying obedience to his brother and supported by the captains and soldiers of his father, came to the Cañari, who he hoped to befriend. He told them that his desire was not to do harm to his brother, but to have them all as friends, and to make Quito another Cusco in which all could rejoice. And inasmuch as he was disposed, the Cañari should allow him to build himself lodgings and rest houses in Tomebamba, where he, as Lord Inca, should take his pleasure with his women, as his father and grandfather had done. These things were not as joyfully received as he had thought, for his brother Huáscar had acted faster and had already sent messengers to the Cañari's territory. The seeds of loyalty had already been sown by Huáscar. Atoco, Huáscar's captain general, Cieza believes, was among them as well. And so the Cañaris, along with Atoco and the Mitimaes, seized Atahualpa, with the intention of delivering him up to Huáscar. The rebel prince, claimant to the north, was imprisoned in a tampu, a way station lodging used for travelers along the Inca road. But they underestimated him, for one evening, as his captors drank and grew careless, a woman named Quella smuggled him a coa, a digging tool. Using it, Atahualpa gauged a hole through the tampu wall and fled into the night. And with all the haste, he managed to reach Quito. When it was learned that Atahualpa had managed to escape and was in Quito assembling an army, it instantly became apparent that there would be war. Atoco immediately marched north so that Atahualpa wouldn't have the opportunity to call up the troops of the provinces. But Atahualpa was quick and had assigned a captain general himself, Calcuchima, and two other captains, Quisquis and Ucumari, and also was advancing towards Atoco. Atoco had marched north, his orders clear: stop the rebel prince before he should summon the fury of the north. But he failed to act with the caution his adversary demanded. As Atoco's army rested, unaware, Atahualpa's general, Calcuchima, fierce and clever, had already seized a hill nearby. Calcuchima and his army fell upon them so furiously that most of them were killed, and the rest fled in terror. The ambush was fatal and brutal. The earth drank blood that day in Ambato. Most of them were killed. The survivors fled in terror, hotly pursued, and many of them were taken prisoners. Among them was Atoko. Most who have informed me concerning this say that Atoko was tied to a post and secretly put to death with great cruelty, and from his skull Kalikuchima made himself a drinking bowl set in gold. The death toll on both sides, Cieza writes, numbered between 15,000 and 16,000 men. But Cieza says, "I have been through this town and have seen the battlefield. Probably even more died than they tell." By Atahualpa's order, the rest of those captured were put to death. And so, with this victory, Atahualpa's fame grew and news of it spread throughout the kingdom, and those who supported his cause called him Inca. Few days had passed since Atoko's skull had been split open and turned into a goblet when the shock of his death reached Cusco. Huáscar was dismayed. The defeat had struck at the bone of imperial authority, and the legitimacy of his rule trembled. Rituals were performed, sacrifices were offered to the priests, the temples filled with lamentations for the dead. But grief could not substitute strategy, and so the Inca resolved to strike again. This time, he summoned the great lords of the south, the Collao, the Canchis, the Charcas, the Canas, and the people of Chinchasuyo. All came to Cusco, where he pleaded with them to be faithful, to remember the old laws, the sanctity of the royal fringe. They answered as he desired. Cieza tells us, for they venerated the religious customs not to receive anyone as Inca except he who had assumed the fringe at Cusco. With new blood, the war would continue. Huáscar named as captain general a man called Huanca Auqui, possibly his brother. This new army, freshly assembled and carried by rage and ritual, marched out of Cusco with as many soldiers as could be raised. Their aim, Tomebamba. But they were too late. Atahualpa, fresh from his victory at Ambato, had already arrived. There, in the province of the Cañaris, those same people who had imprisoned him now received him with friendship, hoping past offenses would be forgotten. Cieza writes, "They sent a great company of children and another of men of all ages to go forth to his richly adorned litter, praying for grace and friendship, and that past injuries might be forgiven. But Atahualpa's heart had turned to obsidian. In place of forgiveness, he gave them slaughter. He ordered his captains and soldiers to kill all who had come out to him. Only a few children and temple women were spared. He then executed local chiefs, replaced them with his own men, and surrounded himself with his captains. It was here that he put on the fringe, declaring himself Inca not in Cusco but in Tomebamba, an illegitimate coronation, a crown of rebellion. Yet his enemies were coming. Huáscar's new captain general, Huanca Auqui, advanced rapidly, trying to stop the carnage. He had with him, Cieza reports, more than 80,000 soldiers. Atahualpa, for his part, gathered slightly fewer. But both armies were massive, near equal. Atahualpa, glorious and cruel, had his eyes set on marching towards the heart of the empire, to Cusco. But both armies would meet before that happened. Huáscar's and Atahualpa's forces met in the province of the Paltas, near Cajabamba. Atahualpa watched from a hill as the two armies met. The two forces clashed. Cieza spares us no detail. Although there were many orejones and captains well instructed in the art of war, and the Huanca Auqui did his duty as a loyal servant of the king, Atahualpa emerged victorious. The cost, over 35,000 men were slain. The victors chased the survivors, killing and capturing as they went. Atahualpa was jubilant. He believed the gods had fought on his side. And so, as the dust of the Battle of Cajabamba still drifted over the fields choked with corpses, Atahualpa stood triumphant. He had not only avenged his capture, not only defeated the armies of his brother, he had claimed the right of heaven by fire and by blood. Cusco was now his for the taking. But Atahualpa halted. Like an animal scenting the wind, he turned not toward Cusco, but toward the ghost that had haunted his father's deathbed. He had heard news that the bearded men had come again. On May 13 of 1532, the Spaniards landed again at Tumbes. Pizarro this time brought not 13 men, but 130 foot soldiers and 40 cavalrymen. He had left 2 men behind, as we know, 2 of his own Christian brothers. They were dead. Murdered, according to some. Betrayed, according to others. Either way, Pizarro considered it treason. He marched into Tumbes and ordered his forces to disembark and fortify themselves. The native sense in blood had already scattered into the valleys, but Pizarro wanted vengeance. He commanded his captains to go out and ranchear, to raid. Find whoever they could, capture women, seize llamas, strip the land. If the death of the 2 Christians had gone unanswered, then 1,000 Indians would scream in their place. And they did. Soto crossed the river with cavalry. They killed, they captured, they returned with spoils. And then, just as the Spaniards' fury began to take root in the soil, a delegation came. The lords of Tumbes returned. Pizarro listened. He knew the offer came from fear, not friendship, but he accepted it, pragmatically. He needed guides, he needed beasts of burden, he needed peace long enough to move forward. He warned them if they broke their word again, he would destroy them entirely. But for now, the past was forgiven. The conquest would resume. Yet even as peace was declared, another kind of war had begun. From the hills of Cajamarca, Atahualpa had sent an Orejon to spy on the Spaniards. He walked among the Cañari in secret, pretending to be just another native porter. He counted their horses, he noted their weapons, and when he returned to Atahualpa, he reported with confidence, and said that if many were gathered, it would be easy to kill them all, for they were so few, and thus he affirmed it. From the coast of Tumbes, the Spaniards turned their faces inland. The march was brutal. They traveled over those plains with great toil, for the deep sand wearied those who went on foot, and as there was no shade, and the sun was strong, and no water except that carried in gourds, they became faint and suffered great fatigue. In one valley, the local chiefs had already heard what happened to those who resisted the bearded strangers. Fear of their horses and of the flash of their swords made them choose cunning over courage. They came out in peace. Once the camp was supplied, Pizarro sent Hernando de Soto eastward, with a detachment of horses and infantry to scout the sierra. Guided by locals, they came to a place called Casas. There was such abundance of provisions that they were astonished. But news of their arrival had reached the Serranos. They said that the Christians were mad, wandering here and there, and among Atahualpa's mitimaes and native allies, some decided to kill them. A group emerged carrying strong cords, thinking the Spaniards would be as easy to catch as Pacos. They misjudged. Soto, with those who were with him, came to blows with the Indians, of whom many were killed. A Christian named Jimenez was wounded, and he who did it paid for it, for with swords and blows they cut him to pieces. The rest, terrified, fled. Some were taken prisoners, and the Spaniards plundered all they could before returning to Pizarro. On the return, Soto saw for the first time the royal road, which crossed the sierra, and marveled at its construction. The prisoners were brought to Pizarro, and from their mouths came the news that would shift the Spaniards. The captured Indians told much of the wars between Huáscar and Atahualpa, and said that Atahualpa was marching towards Cajamarca. For the Spaniards, these words were more than rumor. They were an opening. 2 kings locked in a war meant a divided empire. And a divided empire, Pizarro knew, was prey for the taking. While Pizarro was founding San Miguel and pushing inland, the other war, the War of the Inca brothers, was burning toward its final act. Atahualpa, fresh from his great victory on the provinces of the Paltas, was in pursuit of Huáscar's captains. As he marched toward Cusco, he placed governors over every province he pleased, showing great cruelty, killing many whom he hated for following Huáscar. In council with his captains, Atahualpa decided not to advance further himself. The reasons were twofold. First, the Tomebambas and many peoples from Quito were friends from fear, not from love, and still had faith in Huáscar. If they saw him near Cusco, they might strike Atahualpa from the rear. Second, those bearded soldiers who wandered from land to land, eating and stealing, were so bold that as few as they were with their horses, they had accomplished so much. To guard against both dangers, he would remain in Cajamarca with a strong force while Calcuchima and Quisquis marched on Cusco to finish Huáscar. Huáscar's captains marched until they reached the valley of Jauja, where they found Huáscar's order to give battle once more. Here they gathered a mighty host. Many Huancas, Yauyos, Chancas, Yuncas, Chachapoyas, Huancachupachos, and other nations, numbering 130,000 men. Atahualpa's army under Calcuchima and Quisquis was even larger, 140,000 men of war, not counting those bringing the baggage. The two armies met in the valley, each drawn up in squadrons. They shouted insults across the field. Huáscar's men asked why they followed a vile son of a low woman. Atahualpa answered that he was the true king, while Huáscar was not worthy, delighting so much in Cusco, surrounded by women and concubines. At the signal, they clashed. The ground was covered with the dead, and the earth turned to the color of blood. After hours of slaughter by some divine secret, Huáscar's men were defeated. The dead on both sides were, they say, more than 40,000. Calcuchima and Quisquis pressed on relentlessly towards Cusco, their army still vast despite the slaughter. And near the banks of Apurimac, they would catch Huáscar himself. The royal litters were seized, the fringed crown torn from his head. The humiliation was total. The Sapa Inca, heir of the sun, born of the sacred womb, was bound like a criminal. They placed him in chains and fetters, and put him in a litter with strong bars, so that he could not move. Atahualpa, still in Cajamarca, received the news with satisfaction. Huáscar was alive to be humiliated, to be shown as a defeated pretender. It was along this march that the Spaniards, advancing from San Miguel toward the highlands, began to hear the details. The brothers' war was effectively over. The North had triumphed. The Inca world was in the hands of a single man. And that man was waiting for them in Cajamarca. Atahualpa was not idle. From his camp at Cajamarca, he received news of the bearded strangers' every move. When word came that they were not even 2 days away, he ordered his captains and principal lords to gather so that they might decide what to do about the Christians, who quietly, silently were drawing near. They debated long. Some urged an immediate strike, to kill them all with small stones. Others argued it might be madness to worry about a mere 160 men. Better to let them enter Cajamarca, where they would blind them all and take their revenge. In the end, Atahualpa decided to wait, to test them and perhaps to mock them. He sent envoys with a gift, some baskets of fruit and 10 or 12 ducks, badly roasted with their feathers on, and 3 or 4 quarters of mutton so overcooked it had no virtue. Depending on which account one believes, his message was either an invitation to hasten to Cajamarca, where he was waiting to welcome them, or an ultimatum demanding that they leave his lands and return everything they had taken, or he would kill them all. Pizarro received the gift cheerfully, honoring the messengers, giving them small presents, and sending them back a reply that he looked forward to meeting. The Spaniards pressed on, guided by the fearful Indian servants who whispered that Atahualpa's camp would soon fall upon them. When they reached the valley, they saw it. The army of Atahualpa encamped in such a number of tents that it seemed like a city. For the advantage of our men, Cieza says, the Inca had vacated Cajamarca and moved to the nearby position in full view, intending to surround the Spaniards once they entered. Pizarro led his men into the empty city. The plaza was broad and enclosed, with houses and colonnades filling its sides, perfect for what he now had in mind. He summoned his captains and laid out the plan. The cavalry would remain hidden in groups behind the buildings, the infantry stationed in positions to block every exit, and the artillery prepared to fire into the square at the first signal. The next day, on November 15 of 1532, Atahualpa entered Cajamarca in splendor. He was carried on a litter of gold, seated on cushions, adorned with plumes and gold and silver and ornaments. Behind him stretched an army, thousands upon thousands upon thousands, but only the Inca and his immediate guard advanced into the plaza. The sun was already sinking. Confident in his own power, Atahualpa delayed his arrival, convinced that the Spanish horses would be useless after dark. Inside the town, Pizarro had made his preparations. Don Francisco Pizarro had ordered that Hernando Pizarro, his brother, and the captains Soto, Mana, and Belcazar, with the Spanish horsemen armed for war, be ready to charge the enemy, while he himself remained only with 50 men with bucklers. Hidden arquebuskers under Pedro de Candia waited for the signal to fire. Atahualpa advanced in full ceremonial order, with his people in squadrons, many armed in secret. Great drums and many trumpets sounded, their banners unfurled. A truly beautiful sight to see, such a multitude moving against so few. Pizarro, seeing the Inca delay, sent Friar Vicente de Valverde with Felipillo to urge him to come in peace. The Dominican approached, saying that he was a priest of God, and that he sought as much as he could that there should be no war without peace. He carried a breviary, which Atahualpa examined once and again, finding it displeasing with so many pages, and threw it up in the air, not knowing what it was. Then came the insult. Atahualpa told the friar to tell Pizarro that he would not move from where he stood until they returned to him all the gold and silver, stones, clothes, Indians and Indian women, and everything else they had stolen. Valverde hurried back, telling Pizarro that the tyrant came like a rabid dog. At the signal, Pizarro raised a towel. Gandia fired the shots, a new and terrifying thing for them, and the horsemen burst from their quarters, crying, "Santiago, Santiago." The Inca warriors did not fight, but looked only for a way to flee. The Spaniards cut through the crowd, slashing the hands and arms of those holding the royal litter, until Miguel Estete was the first to lay hands on Atahualpa to take him prisoner. The press of bodies was so great that all together went against one part of the wall, enclosing the square, breaking it down to make an escape. The slaughter was so immense, more than 20,000 died. Many more were wounded. That night, word spread across the valleys. The Lord they loved was a prisoner. Atahualpa, now prisoner, reached for the one thing he knew could bend Spanish will: treasure. He offered to buy his life. He said to Pizarro that he would give for his ransom 10,000 plates of gold, and so much silver in vessels as would suffice to fill a long room that was there. The Spaniards doubted at first, then realized it might be true. Atahualpa immediately sent orders throughout the provinces and to Cusco, commanding that the gold be gathered and sent to Cajamarca, and that no one raise a hand against the Spaniards, while his ransom was collected. To speed it up, he asked that a few Spaniards go to Cusco to take the treasure of the Sun's Temple, and Pizarro was content. He sent Pedro de Moguer, Zarate, and Martín Bueno. Meanwhile, Quisquis had already entered Cusco and unleashed a terror on Huáscar's kin. He killed 30 brothers of Huáscar's and robbed great treasures, taking more than 400 loads of gold and silver. On the road north, Huáscar himself was being dragged toward Cajamarca under heavy guard. When he learned that Atahualpa was captive and buying his freedom with a room full of gold, Huáscar begged the heavens for justice, saying that if he had promised one house of gold, he would give 2 to the Christians. The plea was fatal. The guards sent word to Atahualpa. The captive lord understood perfectly the danger of his brother appearing before the Spaniards as the natural king. He feigned grief in front of Pizarro, telling Pizarro that his captains had taken Huáscar alive, and that coming with him they had killed him on the road, as he had news. And then Atahualpa sent the order to kill Huáscar before he reached Cajamarca. He ordered the same messenger to go back in all haste and say that at once, without more thought, they should kill him and throw him where no trace would appear. In the river of Andamarca, they drowned him and cast him down it. While this horror was carried out, the Cusco mission arrived and stripped the Sun's Temple. They began to peel off the plates that lined the walls, with many great jars of silver and gold and plate, chaquira, and other strange things. Cieza adds the scandal that these 3, feeling safe with Atahualpa in chains, violated the sanctity of the temple and its women. They chose the most beautiful of those women and used them as concubines. The Orejones knew then that the Christians were not saints nor sons of God, but worse than devils. At the same time, Hernando Pizarro rode down to Pachacamas, tore open the shrine, and carried back yet more gold. Soon the room of gold was full, and the fights began. Those of Almagro claimed part. Those of Pizarro say that they were the true conquerors. In the end, 100,000 ducats were set aside for Almagro's men, and the rest to be divided. Then came the famous repartimiento, first of silver and then of gold, recorded by Pedro Sancho and copied by Cieza. I affirm and count for certain that there was divided among them 1,326,539 pesos, and to the emperor came of the royal fifths 272,259 pesos. Atahualpa waited. He had kept his side of the bargain. Now he asked for his freedom. Felipillo, the traitor interpreter, coveted one of Atahualpa's women and wanted the Inca dead. He and the other Anaconas spread panic. Armies were coming. Calicuchima was raising war. The land was rising. Pizarro confronted Atahualpa. The Inca answered with dignity. He said that he marveled at such a message, that the Inca had never known how to lie. Soto was sent to scout. If he found armies, Atahualpa would die. If not, he would be spared. Without waiting for Soto to come back, a process was made against Atahualpa. The witnesses were Indians, and their interpreter who examined them was Felipillo. Condemned to be burned, Atahualpa pleaded along the way. He went saying on the road, "Why do you kill me? Why do you kill me? What have I done? My sons and my women." Friar Valverde urged him to accept baptism. He did. Then they strangled him, and to fulfill the sentence they burned with straw some of his hair. Soto rode back too late. There had been no armies. The camp fell into grief and anger. Across the valleys the wail rose. Many killed themselves to serve their lord in death. They say that they took the body from that place and put it in Cusco in a rich tomb. The Christians have never been able to find where. And with the Inca dead, Pizarro did not reconcile with the dynasty by marriage or mercy. He took royal women as concubines. He named a boy Toparpa as a puppet Inca in Cajamarca. It was a coronation without breath, a sun without heat. The gold had been weighed, the fifths sent to Spain. The ransom melted down into bars, and still Pizarro lingered only long enough to secure his spoils. And with the puppet Toparpa in tow, he began the march into the imperial heart. They went on subduing all the land and provinces of the Collao, appointing governors in them, as they went on until they arrived at Cusco. The march was less a conquest than a funeral procession. Towns that had been loyal to Huáscar yielded without fight. Others were broken by steel and fire. And when Cusco itself, jewel of the Andes, navel of the world, opened its gates, the new Inca was set upon the throne, his authority hollow, his word dependent on the nod of foreign captains. From Manco Capac, child of the sun, born from the waters of Lake Titicaca, through the Sinchi Roca, Joque Yupanqui, Maita Capac, Capac Yupanqui, Inca Roca, Yahuar, Huacac, Viracocha, Inca Pachutac, Topac Inca Yupanqui, Huayna Capac, 12 Incas had ruled, each adding stone upon stone until the empire spanned mountains and forests, deserts and seas. Their roads bound the world, their banners crowned the four suyos, and yet, in the time of the 13, the realm grew two heads. Those heads turned on each other, snapping until both were severed. And into that broken neck the Spaniards fixed their yoke. Now there sat a boy, Toparpa, wearing the fringe, clasped by foreign hands. The house of the Inca had not fallen in the field. It had been gutted out from within, and what rose in its place was only the shadow of a king. From then on, the Christians ruled and governed as they pleased in all the land of Peru.